Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday in the Headlines with Mr. Dwoskin. Oh, Wednesday. Sorry, guys. I'm used to Tuesdays, you being Tuesdays. I will make some announcements. Tomorrow we have a concert. It is supposed to be outside. Let's all pray to the weather gods that it's outside. But just in case it's not outside, it will be held here indoors. You will need rain passes, and you could get your rain passes at the library side. You get 2 passes per person. The concert is supposed to be at 7 p.m. Then on Monday, we have Dr. Joe Schwartz here in the auditorium at 2 p.m. He will be talking about cannabis, myths and facts. On Tuesday, we will have our Bright Lights with Gail. It will be unspoken. It is in English with English subtitles, and it is 91 minutes. There will be an introduction before the film. There'll be the film, and then there will be a discussion after the film. On Wednesday, we have Mr. Dwoskin again. And then on the Thursday next week, we will have Shakespeare in the Park. It will be behind the library. It's called The Winter's Tale. And it starts at 6, not at 7. It will be at 6. It's 2 hours plus intermission. The only way it will be indoors if there's thunder showers, but even if it's raining, it will be held outdoors. Thank you, and no further ado, Mr. Dwoskin.
Thank you. Yeah, Shakespeare in the Park. They've been playing all around the city, and if you like that, I remember going. It's always fun. It's always fun to watch. So thank you so much for coming. Good afternoon. I took a chance and came by bike, so I'm hoping that I don't get rained on going back home. I have a couple of things I did want to speak about. I'd like to start by speaking about an editorial that Thomas Friedman wrote in the New York Times yesterday. And he's a great writer, great opinion writer. What was so remarkable was that he had 1,300 responses that were listed in, the day after. And you could actually, New York Times is very good. You could actually read what people wrote. It's like one response after another, after another, after another. So he really did get quite a lot of reaction to what he wrote. What he wrote was, in essence, that Mayor Mamdani of New York City and Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, came to the U.S. for the funeral of the late Senator Lindsey Graham and met for a few minutes with President Trump. What he wrote was that these two men were two sides of the same coin. And that statement that he wrote got a tremendous amount of response. The vast majority of these 1,300 responses were negative. They did not like what Thomas Friedman had written. So I wanted to discuss this a little bit with you, or tell you about it. And the reason why, this is a little bit crackly, this thing here, right? The reason why the reactions were so bad is very indicative of where people stand now in terms of assessing Mr. Mamdani, the mayor of New York, his ideas, and to broaden it out a little bit to see how voters who support the Democratic Party in the United States are so completely changed in their opinion of Israel and we'll call it its philosophy or its actions in the Middle East, and to make it even more big, not just Democratic voters in the United States, but we'll maybe talk about the Western people who live in the Western world as a whole. And things have changed so drastically that to me, this should be a kind of an emergency wake-up call to Israel and to all the people who support Israel in general and to the Jewish community in general. So that's really a kind of I would call it a very not surprising but important thing to look at. So why did he say that Mamdani and Netanyahu are the two sides of a coin? And what was it that he wrote in there that got people so upset? So what he wrote was that Americans have fallen out of love with Israel, and that that even Jewish Americans, who are the largest group of Jews living outside of Israel itself, numbering somewhere around 7 million out of a total of 16 million Jews in the whole wide world. And some of those 16 million people are sitting here with us, if not practically everybody who's here. It's really a kind of we'll call it a wake-up call. First of all, who is Mr. Mamdani? He is the mayor of New York. He was elected in the last election for mayor. He got quite a good majority of the people who voted. He's also a member of what's called the Democratic Socialist Party of America, the DSA. And one of the main policies, if there is such a thing, of the DSA is to completely condemn the state of Israel for its actions, not only in the Gaza war, but in its actions against Iran and against Lebanon as a whole. So the Jewish community of New York City, which is the largest Jewish community living outside of Israel. New York City is the city in the world with the largest number of Jews living in it, bigger than any city in Israel. So that community of Jews in Israel, 1/3 of them voted for Mr. Mamdani. 1/3. 2/3 voted against him, but 1/3 voted for him. And despite the 1/3 of the vote, by the way, let me ask you, what percentage of New York City as a whole is Jewish? Give me an estimation. What would you think? Yeah. No, the percentage. The percentage. No, it's 20%. At one time, it's 20%. Not a bad answer, but at one time it was 30%. But, because of demographics, because of people moving to the suburbs, we'll call them, New Jersey, outside of New York City, moving to Florida. The percentage of Jews in New York City has gone down since the height, which would have been around between the 1950 and 1960. I would say that was probably the height of the percentage of Jews living in New York City itself. So the New York City means the 5 boroughs: Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. That's New York City. Anything that's not in those places is not in New York City. So the mayor of New York City doesn't have a job in foreign affairs. His job is to look after the city itself. Nevertheless, It's such a high-profile job that every single mayor of New York City since 1950, since the state of Israel was created, every mayor has visited Israel. Every mayor of New York City. They visit what's the three I's. You know what the three I's are? And Israel, Ireland, and Australia. That doesn't have an I. I said the three I's. No, Italy, 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 the three I's. So it's not as if foreign visits by mayors of New York City is something that's so unusual. They have a kind of an international personality because so many people who live in New York City come from other places, like Ireland in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Italy the same, and the Jews pretty well the same, plus the Jews who came after the Second World War, plus the Russian Jewish people who came when the Soviet Union collapsed or just before that. So New York City, of course, is a multi-ethnic city. It has a huge number also of Puerto Rican people, Dominican Republic people, and people from all four corners of the world. You know, Chinese people, Japanese people, Korean people. It's the United Nations. You know, that's what it is. Originally, of course, it was Dutch people who lived there as the first Europeans who came. So Mr. Mamdani doesn't feel that he's out of place in making comments about international affairs, even though his job is to really look after the city itself. And he's been in office now for about a year. He's extremely popular and would win any re-election if he ran again. So what he has to say, therefore, is really kind of important because he, you know, is expressing the views that a lot of people agree with. What they agree with, and Mr. Mamdani is, we'll start off by saying this, he's the first Muslim mayor of New York City. His family's origins are not in the Middle East. His family comes from Africa. And they were part of the Indian migration to Africa from India, Muslim Indians, who then came to the US. So that's his background. Yeah. Why is? You thought he's from Palestine. He was never from Palestine. He doesn't speak Arabic. His family is not from Palestine. His wife, however, is, I believe, not positive. I have to say, I'm not positive, but I think his wife is Palestinian, but I'm not sure. You can look it up. Somebody can look it up who Mamdani's wife is, but definitely not him. But he is very, very attached to the Palestinian cause and has been attached to that cause for a very long time, even though he himself is not Palestinian. In general, we would have to say the whole Muslim world is somewhat attached to the Palestinian cause because they see it as supporting a group of fellow Muslims who are oppressed. And they also see the city of Jerusalem as being one of their most holy cities in their religion after Mecca. So those are some of the two reasons why the Muslim world as a whole, consisting of 1.5 billion people versus 16 million Jews, are focused on this particular issue as opposed to Sudan, where Muslims are fighting with each other, or the whole Muslim world where there's all kinds of all kinds of things going on, Pakistan, Afghanistan. You can name the conflicts in the Muslim world, you need a long sheet of paper. So what was it that, let me now explain what Thomas Friedman wrote. He wrote, instead of Mamdani condemning Israel on a kind of a one-sided basis, understanding that 20% of his citizens are Jewish. Now, if you take a poll of Jews in the United States and you ask the following question, do you think that being attached to Israel is part of your identity? Well, we'll even leave the word religion out of it. We'll say as part of your identity. What percentage do you think of Jews would say, yes, it is part of my identity? The answer is 70%. So that's a pretty high percentage. Of course, 30% is also a pretty high percentage of Jews who say, no, Israel doesn't mean anything to me. That would be their, the idea or the opinion of 30%. The word anything, I wouldn't say that strongly, but it's not important to me. So therefore, when Mamdani condemns Israel, he's really kind of, I would say, insulting is a funny word, but something like that. The feelings of 70% of 20% of his constituency, which is a lot of people after all, So, and he's so strong about it. And as far as other foreign relations are concerned, he's not talking about, let's say, the tariffs that the United States has put on the whole world. He's not talking about other important issues, like the second issue that I was going to talk about today, having to do with climate change and the fires that are really consuming a large part of Europe. He seems to be focused on this one issue as opposed to other issues when it comes to things outside of New York City. So for better or for worse, that's what he says. And what he says is wholeheartedly that the Palestinians are right and the Israelis are wrong. He said that he's come close to saying, or no, he has said, he doesn't believe that Israel should be a Jewish state. He says that Israel should be just a plain, ordinary state, and that all the Palestinians who left Israel from 1948 and since should be allowed to come back and live there if they want in a single state called Palestine, which would have Jews and Arabs living in it together. That would be his desire. That would be his goal. That would be his ideal. Needless to say, the vast majority of Jewish people who live in Israel would not agree with that at all. And the vast majority of Jews who live outside of Israel would not agree with that at all. Remember one important fact, that Israel is the only Jewish majority country in the world, number one. And number two, Israel was constituted in its founding as a Jewish state by a United Nations declaration, which recognized Israel as a Jewish state. So Mamdani's opinion goes against almost all of the Jews who live in that country, and against the United States resolution that set up that country, and against Israel's Declaration of Independence, which described itself as a Jewish state. So he would like to turn the clock back, we'll say, back to 1947, before the United Nations decided on the future of Palestine, and say, let's do a redo of that whole decision 77 years later. Did you have your hand up or something? Yeah. We'll do comments and questions after that, but why not? Policy of the Canadian government. Oh, the US government. Yeah. Well, pretty well, the whole Western world at this point, has come to an agreement that there should be a state called Palestine. Canada, Australia, all of Western Europe, and the UK, and not the United States, have all recognized that the Palestinian people who live today under Israeli occupation, they should have a state of their own. And oh boy, what's it? What? I know that music. Now, Thomas Friedman. Let's go back to him. He agrees with that, and And what he said is that if Mamdani wanted to do something practical, even if it's less practical but more symbolic, would be for him to get to bring to New York City Israelis and Palestinians who agree with the idea that there should be a Palestinian state alongside Israel, not replacing Israel. So in other words, since Prime Minister Netanyahu is 100% against this idea, there's no point saying that there should be a Palestinian state instead of Israel, because that isn't going to happen. And no Jews who live in Israel would agree with that. So why not bring together people who would like to have a kind of a coexistence on both sides? That was Thomas Friedman's point. The reason he said that Netanyahu and Mamdani are the opposite sides of a coin are that Netanyahu says that the Palestinians have no rights whatsoever to have any sort of entity of their own. And Mamdani says that the Jews in Israel have no rights to have any entity of their own also. That's why he made that allusion to the two sides of the same coin. So what were the reactions of these 1,300 people that wrote in? The vast majority said, Mr. Friedman, you should get another job. You're completely wrong. Why? Mr. Netanyahu had led a war which caused the deaths of 90,000 Palestinians. Mr. Netanyahu has been condemned as a war criminal by the International Court of Justice. And Mamdani started his speech saying that even though there is a warrant out for Netanyahu's arrest by the International Court, if he comes to New York City, he as a mayor doesn't have the jurisdiction to arrest him. So that was how this whole business got started. Netanyahu, of course, went to Washington, but if Netanyahu ever showed up in New York City, I mean, then Mamdani would not have the right to arrest him. So you see, that's where this whole thing came from, and that's where. So if you read the replies or the comments of all these 1,300 people, the vast majority said, "How could you possibly compare a war criminal with blood on his hands to Mr. Mamdani, who's the mayor of New York, who never killed anybody?" That was the reaction of all the people who wrote these things. Now, what this says was that Israel has lost so much credibility in the eyes of, we'll call it the left wing of America, or the Democratic Party of America, that this is a really serious thing, that it's not a bunch of, quote, democratic socialists who think this way. This is the opinion of perhaps over half of the whole American population. And even 1/3 of the Republican voters think that way. So that's there on one side. Then you have the independents, and then you have the Democrats on the other side. So if 1/3 of Republicans agree with this, you know that the state of Israel is in deep, deep trouble vis-a-vis the opinion of the United States. And if that's the opinion of the United States, what about the opinions of all of Western Europe and Canada and Australia and the whole rest of the Western world, who Israel, as a country of 10 million people, desperately need to trade with, to deal with, to have as allies against some kind of Islamic terrorist organizations which exist and which will continue to exist. In other words, Israel has boxed itself in a corner that it's going to be very hard to get out of with this administration, meaning the Netanyahu administration. And the biggest fear that I have is that the next administration of Israel, which is going to have to be much more accommodating to the idea of the Palestinians, that even them, they will not be able to get out of that box. And that now it is so, things have come to a point in Israel because of the Hamas massacre that Israeli politicians are afraid to even say the word Palestinian. The fact is, as you and we all know, there are today around 5 million Palestinians living under Israeli control. And there seems to be no discussion in an election that's coming up in October of what should be the relationship between those people and the state of Israel. So this is really the crux of the matter. And it's a hard time, to have to face these particular issues, these questions. But it really, there's, what I'm trying to emphasize is there's been a big change in the public opinion of the United States, and especially the younger people in the US, more than half of which would take the Palestinian side over the Israeli side if there was a choice between the two of them. So that's the Thomas Friedman article. You could look at it you could Google it in the New York Times. It was, to me, a super sensible, reasonable thing to say. And so many people just poured down negative comments that, I was, and I read all kinds of sources every single day. I was surprised at how strongly the feelings have changed against, it bleeds from being against Netanyahu and his government to being against the state of Israel as a whole, and the state of Israel as a Jewish state as a whole. So, and once that feeling is there, of course, that attracts anti-Semites who then can act out their prejudices, almost saying, well, the U.S. agrees with us, so, we can attack Jews and do whatever we want. And you saw the other day in Toronto, there was an attack on two bagel shops that, many people know about, that are at the heart of the Jewish community in Toronto, let's say. Questions, comments about this? Yeah. Let me just look at my watch. Okay, go ahead. Well, he won an election, so it couldn't have been that against him. There's never been an Israeli party that ever won a majority. Ever. But I will say this, okay, the polls, first of all, political polls in Israel cannot be compared to political polls in Canada or the US. Let's start with that. So if you read polls say this and polls say that, they're not accurate for a million different reasons. One of the reasons is that there are so many different political parties in Israel that people can change their minds pretty quickly, and that would have a result in the election, and that the polling systems in Israel are just not as refined as they are here or in the US. Today, were the polls pro or for? Well, let's put it like this. I mean, there was an election. This government of Netanyahu lasted 4 years. Okay. So you're asking me 4 years ago, what were the opinions of Israelis? Is that your question? Okay, well, the results speak for themselves. Individual. Well, most people voted against Netanyahu, if that's what you want to say, by a long shot. Well, yeah, because but the but is okay that he made a government. He made a government with people who supported what he wanted. That government represented what most of the people in Israel wanted. That's why he has a government. The government was 64 out of 120, not a big number, but still no, but I mean the fact is, okay, let me answer the question in a different way. Okay. If you were at, and polls ask this question, who do you think would be the best leader for Israel? Netanyahu was number one. Number one. Okay. Now that doesn't mean he got over 50%. He was the best, but if you put a line of 10 people, then he was the best of that 10 people. Yeah, do you understand what I'm trying to say? Well, but opinion is that it's not politics. He's a politician. He's no, an individual. As an individual, he was picked as the best leader possible for the state of Israel by more people than who picked any other choice. No, picking Netanyahu. They asked the question. The question is asked by pollsters. Who do you think would be the best prime minister of Israel? Netanyahu got more choices than anybody else. That's last time. And he's close to getting it this time, by the way. Well, it also proves that he is such a skillful politician that he's able to explain himself and win support by saying, I am the only person who could lead this country, and anybody else who leads it would put the country in danger. Therefore, why should you even take a chance on anybody else when you see proof positive that I have led this country through X number of wars? I've defeated Hezbollah, I've defeated the Gazans, I've defeated Hamas, I've defeated Iran. Look at what I've done for this country. I mean, most people in Israel, where bombs fall on their heads every now and then, would say, you know what? I don't like you. You're a slimy, what's the word? Corrupt, megalomaniac. You give jobs to all of your family's friends. You've subverted the court system. You're trying to subvert democracy in the country. But none of that matters if you can stop bombs from falling on our heads. And that's what people are concerned about. That's their number one concern. But let me just come back and say this. The last polls that I read, and consistent polls, have shown that Netanyahu, with his current government, meaning his allies, the racists, the religious nationalists, and the ultra-Orthodox, they will not get a majority this time. No poll has shown that they could get a majority. So therefore, he now. Netanyahu is not stupid. He says, okay, you know what? Maybe I'll form a government with people I don't have now. So that would be the idea. I said, oh, you know what? Maybe I could sell myself as a more moderate version of myself to the Israeli public who will vote for me as a more moderate person, or who might vote for a political party that I've just created to siphon off votes from the opposition, and maybe they'll vote for my erstwhile allies, and then I'll promise them so much when I get, when it comes, the election results come in, and if I could bribe them with enough goodies, maybe they will come onto my side, and then I can make a government without the people that the Israeli public doesn't really like. So that's his hope. Yeah, I don't think it's going to sell, but what do I know? The voters have the last say. You should also know, by the way, that Israelis cannot vote abroad. They cannot vote in a consulate. They cannot vote in an embassy. They must return to Israel unless they're working for the government itself, being sent off to one mission or another. Now, what's happened is that the government has tried to ask the airlines not to allow people who are coming back to Israel just to vote, to get on a plane just to vote, to try to do something to stop them from coming back to Israel just to vote. Isn't that funny? And by the way, okay, I saw this, you might have seen this also. The biggest rival to Netanyahu is Mr. Eisenkopf. Gabi Eisenkopf. His party is called Yashar, which is like, it means two things. It means straight and it means honest. I like that double entendre. He put up two huge posters in Cyprus in Hebrew saying, come back to Israel and vote for me and get rid of this government. Okay? So some people in Cyprus are saying, hey, how we're having a foreign politician use our country to do politics? Since when is that allowed? Of course it's allowed. Anybody can put up any advertising poster you want. The poster was in Hebrew only, by the way. And it's a 30-minute flight from Cyprus to Israel, no big deal. But somehow or other, Netanyahu feels it's not kosher to have his opponents come back to vote against him, but it's okay if his allies come back to vote for him. So, that's the extent that this campaign is going. And the campaign is really starting now because think of it. We're in July. The elections are October 27th. There's lots of time for shenanigans to happen. What do I mean by shenanigans? Parties form, parties ally themselves. They haven't even picked all the candidates on the list yet, or who's going to actually be on the, who's going to be on the voting list when the elections are finally held. In other words, in other words, when you are in Israel, you don't vote for a person. You only vote for a party. You just take the one slip of the party, you drop it in the box, that's your vote. Each party on its own figures out who should get elected to parliament if they win enough votes. So some parties have primaries. Some parties, the leader of the party just picks all the people. And those are basically the two ways of doing it. Some it's the executive members of the party, a whole group of small people who will sit down and make a list, okay? The order of the list is very important. Who's number one, who's number two, who's number 10. So if you get 10% of the votes in Israel, you will get 10% of the seats, which would be 12. The first 12 people on the list get elected. The 13th person doesn't get elected. So that order of the order is very, very important. And the fighting that goes on now is who should be on that list and what order should they be. So there's a few different ways of looking at how to solve that question. One could say, well, I've been, a member of this party for 40 years. I was elected. Everybody knows my name. I was a minister. I have all kinds of political people behind me. So I want to be up on the top of the list. Okay. Another way of saying is, but if we just put all the people by seniority, everybody on the list is going to be 60 years old and up. How are we going to appeal to young people to vote for us if they say, well, all I'm going to do is get old people like us elected to parliament? We need some new blood. So if you need new blood, that means you have to take somebody who doesn't have the seniority, doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the connections, and put them in front of somebody who's given his life to the party. So you can just imagine how much fighting goes on when that order gets decided. Mr. Netanyahu, so the way that the parties decided to open up the selection and not have what's called, a cigar-filled room of buddies picking the list, they said, we're going to have primaries like they have in the US, except that the primaries, what they might do is they can have a list of 100 people, and you can pick the order that you would like these people to be on the list. So that will give the members of the party the say in who should be and where should they be. But Mr. Netanyahu said, wait a minute. If we do that in our party, I lose control over who gets to be in my government, on my list. So he said, I want to have 10 places reserved. I want to be able to pick 10 people of my own and to put them where they want, where they should be on the list. So that would be a combination of primary and the leader choosing. Other parties have just the primary, other parties have just the leader choosing. And everyone works out their own system. But once that system is set, it's set. Whoever gets elected, it goes, if you get 5 seats, the first number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 get elected, and that's it. Number 6 will wait until one of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 passes away, resigns, retires, whatever. Then that number 6 jumps up and will get into the Knesset because that party has 5 seats. That's how the system works. It's democratic as any other, as democratic as any other system is. Okay. The trick of the party is to try, if you were a party like the Likud party, or if you're a party like the other center parties, you want to make your list as representative as possible to pick people from all walks of life, from all ethnic backgrounds, urban, rural, males, females, moderate nationalists, less moderate nationalists, some minorities, some Arab candidates, some Druze candidates, and that's how you sort of make up your list. But if you're a party like the ultra-Orthodox parties, if you look at their list, they just go to the rabbi and say, okay, rabbi, who should be on the list? And they're all men. They're all in black coats. They're all in black hats. And when you see the picture on the posters, they put posters on, vote for this party, and they slap a poster on a wall. When you look at the ultra-Orthodox posters, if you walk back far enough, you wouldn't be able to recognize anybody. They'll look exactly the same. White shirts, black coats, black hats, beards. Like, you know what I mean? It like might have punched them out of the same mold, because they're all exactly the same. So every party can pick their own in their own way. And also, by the way, the Arab parties, there's our Arab parties, they have the same dilemma. Okay, I need to have one woman who has a hijab and one woman who doesn't have a hijab. I need to have, one guy with a beard, one guy without a beard, one person from the villages, one person from the cities. So they all have to go through that same selection process to figure out, who to pick as a candidate. Because some people will look at the list of candidates and say, oh, I like that person, I'm voting for that party. Other people will say, I don't care who they're running, I'm just voting for that party because I believe in its principle. So it's a democracy like everything else. So that was a long answer to a short question. So right now, I'll just finish with this. The polls in Israel are showing that neither bloc, meaning the pro-Netanyahu bloc or the anti-Netanyahu bloc, could make a majority government without the support of the Arab parties who run their own candidates, who have their own parties, and who with one exception, have never been part of any government in Israel. Okay? Now, just to tell you another thing that you might have read about, you might have heard about, or did I say it last time? I don't remember. Mr. Eisenkrat's son died in the Gaza war. Netanyahu made an ad showing an AI image, an AI, right? In other words, a manufactured image of somebody who looked almost identical to his son running to embrace an Arab politician. To say, in other words, if you vote for Mr. Eisenkrat, he will run to embrace the Arab politicians. And then, of course, what is that supposed to mean? You're putting Israel in danger. Mr. Eisenkrat was never a politician, so he never did that. Mr. Netanyahu himself, he ran to the Arab politicians and tried to get them to come into his government, but they refused. So the opposition party, put out information and showing Netanyahu speaking to the Arab politicians to try to get him in the government. It didn't happen because Mr. Bennett, who successfully made a government, for the first time invited one of the Arab parties into the government, and that government lasted a whole year and a half until Netanyahu skillfully undermined it. So what he's trying to say is, Netanyahu is trying to say is, you cannot form a government with the Arab parties. If that's the case, then nobody will be able to form a government. So if that's the case, then maybe they'll pick Netanyahu again in a subsequent election to have a majority. That's his little game. So let's leave that aside. Let me just check my time. Okay. So I have 10. Did you have a question? Oh, you did. So I'm sorry, Myrna. Go ahead. Sorry. Let me listen to you. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. So Myrna came up with a very a wise comment, which is that there's so many political parties in Israel because of proportional representation. And I want to just give you some background about this. The first election in Israel was held in 1949. So just think of it. The state was born. They had an election immediately. They had 120 seats in the Knesset, the same number as they have now. Even though the population of Israel at the beginning was less than 1 million, now with 10 million, they still have the same number of seats. So they didn't expand the seats to match the growth in population. Now, what they decided at that point was to be super democratic. You needed, in the first election, to get one seat, you needed 1 out of 120 votes. In other words, you needed 0.8% of 0.8 of a percent. In other words, less than 1%. If you got more than 0.8% of the votes, which is the equivalent of 1 out of 120, you got one seat. So you can imagine the proliferation of parties which ran, and there are lots of parties who only got one seat. Okay. Now, in Europe, where they've done this for a long time, in general, they do have a barrier of 5%. If you don't get 5% of the votes, you don't get any seats at all. Israel gradually raised that barrier from 0.8 to 3.25. The 3.25 was just done in recent times to try to prevent Arab parties from getting elected to the Knesset, because there were 4 Arab parties running, in general 4. None of them got over 3.25% of the vote. So the plan was to keep Arabs out of the Knesset. Will make the barrier 3.25%. This was made. The main proponent of this was Mr. Lieberman, who is still running, for parliament in this election. He's an ultra nationalist. He's anti-Arab, but he hates Netanyahu. So therefore, he's been in the opposition in the last two elections. But beforehand, he was part of Mr. Netanyahu's government. What that did was, as you suggested, it got all the four Arab parties to join together onto one list called the Joint List. And they ended up not only getting over 3.25%, they ended up getting a total of something around 13% of the total vote. They got 15 seats in the election that they ran together. But they're also Israelis. Arab Israelis are Israelis. What does that mean? They can't agree with each other. So they couldn't come up with a joint list for the following elections. Because if they said, if you're going to be on the list, I'm not going to be on. I'm not running with you. If this guy's on the list, I'm out. So the whole joint list collapsed. It collapsed. So instead of having four parties united, they ended up with just two parties united. As of now, there's two-ish parties united. And the ish is the third one. The third one has not yet formally joined the list. And that third one is the one that would be a potential coalition member if they were elected. So the third one said, look, we served in the government before. We believe that the state of Israel is a Jewish state. We believe that being an Arab party, we have a right to representation. And what I want to do in the government is get the best deal for my constituents. So that's his idea. Okay. The other Arab parties say, we do not believe in a Zionist state. We believe that Israel should be a state where all citizens are equal. And therefore, we cannot join a government that says Israel is a Jewish state, giving Jews all the rights that Arabs don't have in Israel. Because, the government of Netanyahu passed something called the nation-state law. The nation-state law said specifically, Israel is a Jewish state, Jews are the bosses in this country, and Arabs are just here on our tolerance. Basically, that's what it said. I'm not going to get into more details. Basically, that's what it said. The people who were most upset about that, by the way, were not the Arab Muslim population, but the Druze population. The Druze population of Israel say, wait a minute, we've been serving with you in the military. Our children are dying, and you're saying we don't really belong to the state. We're here on your tolerance. So Mr. Netanyahu, of course, ran to the Druze community and said, well, you know what? I didn't really mean it in that way, but he didn't change the law. So that's where that part of it stands. There's one Arab party who is militantly anti-Zionist. And that party says, in a certain sense, that we want to reluctantly participate in the elections because we don't recognize the state of Israel altogether. But since it's a democracy, we might as well throw our hat in. That party did not get elected in the last election. They got 2% of the vote. They didn't get 3.25%, so they were dumb. If that party had any brains, they would join with the other 3 or 4 Arab parties, and they would get one of their members elected to the Knesset. But so far, they haven't joined. Now, it's a long time between now and October 27th. They may end up saying, sure, okay, we'll join. And that's that one. So yes, ma'am. Yeah. No, there's a lot more things wrong. I didn't mention all of them. Okay, you picked the wrong example. Okay, you picked the wrong. Okay, so let me. first of all, to compare Israel with Arab states, kind of, you know what I mean? We're talking about Israel, not talking about other. You picked the wrong example because the Palestinians who live in Jordan have full citizenship rights, full voting rights. They have 100% the same right as any other Jordanian whose family has lived there forever and ever and ever. Now, of the king of Jordan is a Jordanian. The royal family of Jordan still has a lot of power. Okay, they do have a parliament. The parliament is elected, but that parliament and the prime minister cannot do something if the king disagrees with it. There's nothing to do with Palestinians, Jordanians. It has to do with the king still having power and Jordan not being a full democracy. But of all states, that's the one that gave Palestinian refugees citizenship in their country. The Lebanese didn't do it. The Syrians didn't do it. Egyptians didn't do it. And of course, those are the main places where the refugees went to settle. So not only did the Lebanese not give Palestinian citizenship, they don't even give them the right to practice certain professions that would then sort of overcrowd the market. You know what I mean? So the refugees in these other countries have been supported by the United Nations relief works for 75 years. And the fiction is Lebanon and Syria and Egypt cannot give citizenship to the Palestinians who left in 1948 and their families because they will go back to Palestine one day, and therefore we can't give them citizenship because that would sort of take away their incentive to want to go back. That's the fiction. But obviously after 77 years, it's a fiction, right? Yes, yeah. They have and they haven't. Okay, they have and they haven't. Here's the one right. Here's the one important right that they do not have. Okay, they do not have the right to live in Israel any relatives that they have living outside of Israel. Okay, that's an important right because the law of return said when Israel was born, shortly after they said any Jew living anywhere in the world who's even a quarter Jewish, meaning one Jewish grandparent, they can come from Buenos Aires to come live in Israel. They could come from Stockholm and come live in Israel. But if you have an Arab family who's lived in Israel for generations and their relatives ended up on the other side of the border after the war, they're not allowed to bring them to come back to live in Israel. I'm sorry? They're not drafted in the Israeli army. They are not. The Arab citizens of Israel are not drafted in the Israeli army because Mr. Ben-Gurion said, if we have a war with our neighbors, these people would end up shooting their cousins. So A, we can't trust them, and B, it's inhumane to ask them to fight against their own blood who are like 5 yards on the other side of the border. So that now they are allowed to volunteer. They are allowed to volunteer to serve in the army, but they're not conscripted to serve in the army. And there are plenty who volunteer to serve in the army. Now, the exception is the Druze community. The Druze community of Israel who are Arabs, meaning Arabic speaking, they are an offshoot of Shiite Islam. So they regard their religion as not being Muslim, but effectively they really are, okay? Their community leaders at the beginning said, we speak for the entire community and we will be drafted into the Israeli military. We pledge our loyalty to the state and we want all of our people to be drafted. That's what they said. All of our men to be drafted, not the women. The women stay home. So don't draft Israeli females come to Jewish females serve in the military. There's no Druze females who their father would allow them to shove off and get into a military uniform. So that's the difference in that community. There's another small community called the Circassians. They also agreed to be drafted, just like the Druze. But those two communities together in Israel are about somewhere around less than 200,000 out of 2.1 million Arabs who are Israeli citizens. So they're under 10% of the whole Arab Israeli population. Somebody else had a comment? Nope. Okay. So it's 3 o'clock now. I'll tell you what I wanted to speak about. Maybe we'll do it live next time. To bring our attention back to this idea of climate crisis. Because every statistic that I read and you can read shows that the temperatures in the world have reached new highs that they have never reached before. Europe, especially now, is going through the hottest temperatures that they have ever had. Forest fires have now burnt almost of the 10 top forest fires that have ever happened in Europe. 2 of them are burning right now. Of the top 10, meaning measured by surface area of area burnt. So 2 of the top 10 of forest fires ever burnt in Europe are now burning in France and in Spain. So this is not a passing phase. We are all starting to understand that this is a permanent feature of life, and people have to adapt to it in one way or another. Okay, only the US somehow feels that there is a curtain around the US and that the climate change doesn't affect the US, and they don't have to do anything to mitigate it, and they could do whatever they want to make it worse because they are, special case. But the air and the temperature actually does hit the United States also. But the crisis is so bad that they're contemplating changing their way of life in Europe. I mean, think of this, okay? We all know, those of you who've gone to Spain, right? You know that from 1 o'clock to 5 o'clock, ain't nothing happening in Spain. The stores are closed, the restaurants are closed. Everybody is taking time off because it's so hot, right? So the French government has actually said, you know what? We must think of changing our lifestyle to be like them, because nobody can tolerate 40 degrees in Paris. Not 40 degrees is. What percentage of French homes have air conditioning? Is it half? Not even close. Is it a quarter? Barely. Okay? Barely. So I mean, if you're going to have 40 degrees and you're living in a city, what are you going to do without air conditioning? What that means is decisions have to be made at a top level to say, oh, if we need more air conditioning, we need more electricity production, right? See, how are you going to run those air conditioners? We need to have more air emergency services and cooling off services and water fountains and all kinds of public amenities to allow people not to die, on the streets. This heat wave, the previous heat wave in France, we'll say this, killed 15,000 people. 15,000 people in France died in the heat wave. This year, they're up to about 2,000. Now, the way they define it is, quote, unexpected deaths. What's an unexpected death? Okay, so if you take the average of number of people who die in a day, and you look at yesterday and today and last week and last week, there's 2,000 extra people who died who statistically shouldn't have died because of the heat wave. So these are people who are, we'll say, elderly. I hate using that word because I'm looking at myself. People who live in homes Imagine you live in a nursing home that's not air conditioned, like, and it's 40 degrees outside. Your body is already weak, right? You're already on your last legs. These are the people who are the 2,000 people. Plus, unfortunately, workers in agriculture, workers in construction, who, just pass out because it's just so hot and they just don't understand the effect that heat has on their bodies. So anyway, this is a subject that's worth looking at because it's a civilizational challenge to everybody except people in the United States. Everyone will have to somehow deal with this. We in Canada are actually on the luckiest people in the world because we're so far north. But we still have heat waves. We still have them. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. And please come next week. And